Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. Although lately, I've been on a kick talking about the Zettelkasten. My original intention in this series was to set up an example that related very, very much to writing, but there's been so much interest in the Zettelkasten that I've kind of let the concept of Zettelkasten take over and have a run here on my podcast because people are telling me that it's helpful, and that's what I want to do, is to help out. So here goes for another episode on the Zettelkasten. Yesterday we talked about the index, and today I'm going to take a side note into an example that came from my reading this morning and also touches the very things that we're working with here in terms of the challenges of where to place your new card and how to index it. So let's go forward with a new example today. This is not a constructed example. This actually comes out of my work this morning. And the author was talking about in an experimental methodology, it's very, very important to begin by very carefully making notes of what you're actually observing and all of its characteristics before you dive into trying to explain why this thing is happening. And I thought that was a rather interesting concept. So I made a little note when I was thinking about it that facts first, then causes. And the other note I made myself is the one in purple. I usually put my own observations there. And what I had happened to me with reading this in the morning was reading the quote from the book had given me an insight that was just delicious. But before I could write it down, a very prosaic thought came into my mind and just took over and blotted out the novel insight. Now, this is a phenomenon that I do write about in my book, Writing with Emotion, if you happen to get a hold of that one. And it's the example of what I call the popped bubble. And I have discovered that where my Zettelkasten is concerned, that if I gather up the fragments of the pop bubble, i.e. the thing, the circumstances in which the idea occurred to me, that there is very likely that in the future, what that insight was will come back to me. And because I've indexed the card, I'll be able to find it again. So that's one of the reasons why I made a main card out of this card. So I took a picture of it in this state where it doesn't have a number yet. I don't know where I'm going to place it yet, but I've got some key things that I want to focus on for indexing this card. The idea of the popped bubble, even though this card is not about a pop bubble, it illustrates in my world an example of the pop bubble. And the other thing I wanted to pick up out of the note that the card contains is that you want to get your facts down first, then start looking at the causes, so you don't get the facts and the causes confused. And I've added a hashtag here. And the hashtag is the concept of an idea, because that I want to file it under an idea because I want to be able to get back to it. If I think of what was that idea, I want to be able to find it again, and I'm going to be able to find it in my index under the word idea. Okay, so now where am I going to file this card? I've got 3 potential things that I will end up indexing. I underline in blue here, I don't know if it shows up very well, the key words that I'm going to put in the index. And they're popped, bubble, idea, facts, causes. All of those words will go into my index entry for this card. So where will I place the card itself? So the next thing I'm going to do is start pulling pulling cards in my index to see where I want to place it. And in the interest of time, I'll just go straight to the one that I ended up using. This is the letter I from my index. And yesterday I pointed out how I start with a single letter of the alphabet, and I begin with 1 because that's the first card that contains that letter. Now if you notice here, I put a plus sign next to it when I go to 2, and there's a plus sign after the 2. I have several cards in my index for all of the keywords that start with the letter I. And besides that, and this is a wrinkle that I promised to explain yesterday, if I have a keyword that shows up 3 or more times in my under the general letter, I promote it to its own card. So idea had been used 3 or more times when I gave it its own card, and then when I use a symbol, it's going to be hard to find an example of the symbol, but here's an example down here. It might not be very clear. The symbol I use is a square bracket and an arrow in red, and that tells me that it's on a card of its own. So my matching card I found under the card idea, which interestingly matched the hashtag from my book. And I wrote down on a little piece of notepaper, I use these little guys and I don't throw them away until just about every square inch is written on. And so I found a blank spot where I wrote down a couple of card addresses from my index of things that look like potential places where I might put this card. Well, I found so there's an example. There you can see the card with the 2 addresses that I pulled. Then I'm going to go back to my Zettelkasten here, and I don't know if you can see very much of it. It's in the background there. I've got 8 boxes, although one has supplies and one has older pre-Zettelkasten cards, but 6 of those 8 boxes are actually filled with note cards. And I pulled the cards in this area, and it turned out to be the best match, but a strange match. When I got to the area of this card, and I said, don't worry yet about the numbers. I will do an episode on numbering. I've got 3 different numbering systems in my Zettelkasten that I've played with, and if I were starting from scratch, I'd use a 4th. So I'll talk about numbering another time. So here in this card here, that's the card number, I found an interesting concept that related, and it has the idea that ideas interact powerfully. Well, why so say you have one idea, and this example is an example from a conversation in a novel for middle school children. It's a chapter book that I have been playing with for over a year. And this is a sample conversation between my boy character and his grandfather. And so I just kept this fragment in my Zettelkasten, and it's talking about how ideas interact. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for with my popped bubble, because another idea is going to come along, interact with my pop bubble, and my popped bubble will come back to life. So this turned out to be the best place in my Zettelkasten to put this idea. So I'm going to pause from looking at cards now to explain where does a card go in a Zettelkasten. A card, the new card, goes in the most closely related card that you've got in your Zettelkasten. If you have a very good index, you'll be able to find that card that's most closely related to the one that you are adding. Now, in this strange case, the most closely related card is a very, very different theme. This is a sample conversation from a novel that I'm writing, and the other one is talking about research. But because they are powerfully connected over the concept of interacting ideas, that's where the card really belongs. And the card is talking about a couple of interacting ideas. One is, the sky is blue and the weather is fine. And the other idea, Mother is in the kitchen making a potato salad. Then those two ideas interact and, oh, let's have a picnic. So it's an example of two ideas interacting and producing a third that's a very pleasant experience. That is exactly what I'm in the middle of constructing in this entire Zettelkasten example. So what you have to understand for placing a card is the card goes next to the card that most closely relates to the idea that you're working with. Not subject matter, not headings, not categories. The idea that you're working with. That's how you get powerful interaction. Well, so now I have my card and I know where it's going to go. So now my card can get a number. And my card can now have its card number. Here you see it with its card number. Let me see if I can blow it up and make that card number more visible for you. I'm not sure I can. Bring it into the area. Let's see, probably not. Okay, so it's basically the other card number with just an A added to the end of it, and indicating that it's going to go right after the previous card. But one of the rules that in adding a card, it's very important to include a link message which explains, why does that card go there? You put it in the most closely related spot, but why? Why was that the most closely related spot? For me, that's a discipline that I put on myself when I add to my Zettelkasten. In this instance, however, the card was already full. That did not deter me a bit. I got out a second index card. I've already explained that I cut the corner off the second and subsequent. That's from a previous episode. And then on the second card, I indicate why I felt it belonged there. And I'll read it because it's hard to read on the screen. In card 3B2A, 3B2A-1, we have a fragment of a conversation idea for Jonathan, my hero, and his grandfather. But Grandpa is explaining the very thing that will bring the popped bubble of an idea back to life. So that's why this card belongs there. Now, this has an important implication for the idea of categories in a Zettelkasten and numbering. And I will put a pin in that thought, and we'll come back to that one when we talk about numbering, which will be in just a couple of days. I've got one more to do on indexing, and I promised to explain the symbols, and I will do that in my next video. And then we'll talk a little bit about numbering, because numbering is rather magic. You have to have it, and you've got to devise a system. But if you do your Zettelkasten right, it won't matter what numbering system you use. And I'll explain why that's true, not tomorrow, but starting the day after. I've run a little over, but I hope you'll excuse me, and I hope you will enjoy this example. Good night.